to share about an upcoming joint event sponsored by URI, the Parliament of the World's Religions, Religions for Peace, and the Charter for Compassion. So it will commemorate the 75th anniversary since the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. United Religions Initiative's Voices, a cooperation circle, has been involved in the nuclear issue, and Monica Willard is a participant in that meeting, as well as Kekashan. And they've been meeting on a regular basis. And each meeting starts with a reading of the nuclear prayer, which was created by Bishop William Swing, who is the founder and president of URI. So I'm going to ask Monica Willard if she would please read the nuclear prayer for us now.
Thanks, Audrey. You can also find this on our website as recorded. The nuclear prayer, the beginning and the end are in your hands, O Creator of the universe. In our hands, you have placed the fate of this planet. We who are tested by having both creative and destructive power in our free will, turn to you in sober fear and in intoxicating hope. We ask for your guidance and to share in your imagination in our deliberations about the use of nuclear force. Help us to lift the fog of atomic darkness that hovers so pervasively over our earth, your earth, so that soon all eyes may see life magnified by your pure light. Bless all of us who wait today for your presence and who dedicate ourselves to achieve your intended peace and rightful equilibrium on earth, in the name of all that is holy and all that is hoped. Amen.
Thank you so much, Monica. Amen. So before the meeting starts, with the Voices meeting, and it is dedicated to the nuclear issue, this prayer is read. So I thought it was very fitting for Monica to read that prayer before I begin my presentation. Also, the Parliament of the World's Religions in November 2018 issued its response to the unique challenge of nuclear weapons by putting out a passionate call. And this call noted that conduct that demonstrates a present readiness to use nuclear weapons is immoral and its possession illegal. The belief that the necessity of such weapons will keep countries safe and secure creates such a false sense of safety and security. When you consider that detonating less than even 1% of today's nuclear arsenal will release millions of tons of radioactive soot into the stratosphere that could, among other things, render agriculture unable to sustain civilization and permeate radiation poisoning throughout the world, then you realize that nuclear weapons do not make us safe or secure at all. And the Parliament's call can be read on its website. It is rather extensive, so it would be worth paying a visit to the Parliament's website to read its passionate call. So it is called for the abolition of nuclear weapons. And in July 2020, these 4 organizations will be introducing the Hiroshima-Nagasaki Accord. And it is a joint statement issued by URI, the Parliament, Religions for Peace, and the Charter for Compassion. We already have 75 endorsements. And if you wish to sign up and endorse this accord or your organization, you can visit. Right now, I do believe it is up on the Voices URI Cooperation Circle website, and it will be soon available on the Parliament's website, as well as the 2 other websites of the 2 other co-sponsoring organizations. So please feel free to sign your endorsement on this accord. You can also read the accord on each of the organization's websites. What is wonderful about this accord is that it addresses 9 specific action items. And for example, I won't read all of the 9 action items, but if you're a young person, you can demand urgent governmental action before these weapons rob you and your children of a future. So it covers youth, diplomats, religious leaders, and those who may not be informed about nuclear issues. And if you're a politician, a citizen, a scientist, an environmentalist, and a nation armed with nuclear weapons, these are all the 9 calls made to these different categories of civil society to please take affirmative action in what this accord is asking us to do. Because collectively, we tried to make it as inclusive as possible. Of course, these are general categories, to make this accord applicable as action items for civil society and the different constituents to sign on the accord and to really bring home this commitment to all of us. So now I want to share about this video that is being created that will feature President Mikhail Gorbachev, former Secretary of State George Shultz, and the mayors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And the importance of featuring the historic work of President Gorbachev and Secretary of State Shultz, who accompanied President Ronald Reagan to Iceland for a meeting, is the potential that these leaders saw in having the nuclear arsenal dismantled. So it's a very historic meeting. And I'm going to give you some background about it. And basically, in 1986, this meeting was held between the 2 presidents in I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, Reykjavik, Iceland. The meeting was a second between these 2 leaders, and it was intended not as a summit, even though it's called a summit now, but it was a session in which the leaders were to explore the possibility of limiting each country's strategic nuclear weapons to create momentum in the ongoing arms control negotiations. It is, however, called a summit because it almost resulted in a very sweeping nuclear arms control agreement in which the nuclear weapons of both sides would be dismantled. And although no agreement was reached, many historians and government officials, including President Gorbachev himself, later considered this meeting a turning point in the Cold War. Now, we were very fortunate to have the participation of Secretary of State George Shultz, who is now 99 years old, as well as President Mikhail Gorbachev. Now, we have some video shots of George Shultz, who was very wonderful and courteous and generous to take this video recording of himself. We also had a commitment from President Gorbachev to do likewise. His office has been extremely cooperative and sent in historic videos, very apropos to this summit. So their participation has been incredibly wonderful. And in that sense, the video that is being created, that will be featuring these 2 giants in history, in and of itself becomes a historic video. So in the summit, President Reagan had been committed to opposing the Soviet Union at every opportunity. And I should say, not in the summit, but as a run-up to the summit. And the White House really believed that American supremacy was key to US survival. And it was thought that an accelerated arms race, however, would cause irreparable harm to a very faltering Soviet economy. So President Reagan was gradually being perceived as an extremist hardliner bent on the complete destruction of the Soviet Union. And to allay such fears, he attended the summit meetings. Meanwhile, President Gorbachev, those of us who are of that age group that remembers this, and I belong to that age group, based his presidency on the dual reform programs of perestroika, which means restructuring, and glasnost, which means openness. The Soviet Union was a military and industrial power for much of its history, but in its waning decades, it was faltering under the strain of its outmoded economic system and industrial infrastructure. To compete against the West, the Soviet economy and society needed drastic restructuring. And President Gorbachev, however, did not feel that he could afford to continue down the path to reform without the assurances about national security. And he needed an arms limitation treaty in order to accomplish that. During the exchange of proposals, the leaders agreed that nuclear weapons must be eliminated, and they nearly produced an agreement to eliminate the Soviet and American nuclear weapon stockpiles by the year 2000. What prevented the agreement from being fulfilled was the space-based missile defense system known as the Strategic Defense Initiative, or SDI, which was under consideration by the United States. And President Reagan refused to limit the SDI research and technology to the confines of a laboratory. President Gorbachev, however, would not accept anything less than a ban on missile testing in space. So despite the failure to reach an agreement on that issue, both sides felt that the meeting was a success in the sense that it opened the way for future progress, and in fact it did. George Shultz, the then U.S. Secretary of State, who was at the summit, recalled the situation was unique because it brought together these two leaders who really passionately believed in nuclear disarmament, and both were prepared to act on that belief. And George Shultz said, "I suppose that what startled people in Reykjavik was not what was said, because both Reagan and Gorbachev had said that before, but the fact that here were the two leaders in an operational setting talking about timetables. All of a sudden, this vision had a certain reality to it that would have changed the scene dramatically, and that really did grab people's attention." And at the time, however, the summit was deemed a failure due to poor preparation and a chaotic negotiating process. In short, these two leaders saw the promised land, but could not reach there. From the nuclear disarmament perspective, however, the value of this summit was less in the specific proposals that were discussed by the parties, but rather in the fact that the two leaders boldly tackled the issue of very deep reductions perhaps not complete elimination. For example, they did not discuss tactical nuclear weapons, and the US wanted to keep nuclear-armed aircraft, but they came very close to it. So on the conceptual level, that summit was the logical next step to the 1985 summit in Geneva, where the same two presidents announced in a joint statement that nuclear war cannot be won and should never be waged. And while that may seem like an obvious point, it became the first formal recognition of the truth by leaders of the United States and the Soviet Union. So here it was, clearly and plainly articulated. Again, nuclear war cannot be won and should never be waged. So a lot of progress was made on, as a consequence of this summit, on an Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, shortened for INT. And one of the real challenges to the negotiators was to define what missiles would be covered and which would have to be governed by other treaties. So you can see the complexity that's involved. And a similar problem arose during the START, which is the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty negotiations, which took place in the Bush administration. So definitions of various hardware has always been a problem because the arsenals are so huge. So a lot of work was done in Iceland on reaching agreement on the international nuclear arms treaty terms. However, that got very little attention since the media focused on the two presidents standing on the steps, saying their farewells without having reached an agreement on any arms control issues at that time. So the press described it as a failure, but in fact, it was not. And as Secretary of State George Shultz often reminds people, there was in fact considerable progress being made behind the scenes on how we would deal with human rights issues between the two countries. And it was the first time that the Soviet Union had ever let another country become involved with human rights issues in the USSR. So Thomas Graham, who is also a member of this meeting group, the Voices meeting group, said, and I quote, "I think Mikhail Gorbachev did the Russians and everyone a huge service by what he tried to do and by what he did accomplish. He tried to do three things at once, which were more than any one human being could do. He tried to democratize Russia. He tried to give it a modern economy, and he tried to end the Cold War. It was too much, but he was still a great force, a great man." And this video, it is our hope, will capture the greatness, the heroism of the two currently surviving participants in that summit. And it is really quite a privilege to be putting this video together. And it really will be a historic work. So I'm very honored to have the privilege to help in a small way see history in the making. So this video will be broadcast on August 6th and 9th, and will be, the fact that these two giants of history agreed to participate in it is just really quite mind-blowing. And this Their willingness to participate in the video, however, really signifies their continued commitment to the abolition of nuclear weapons. So we, as the human species, are very blessed to have committed leaders and individuals, whether in the political realm, in civil society, really committed people, and the people who meet every week on the Voices initiative to see to the realization of the promised land. So this 75th commemoration really reminds us all that such heinous weapons of mass destruction of all life forms on Earth impacts real lives across the spectrum of species, including all of us, the real people who share their stories of suffering, and importantly, what we must learn from their stories. And we will be featuring the testimony of the Hibakusha. And these are the survivors of the nuclear bombs in Japan. And we felt that to really help us all to remember that real people truly suffered and paid huge price when they became victims of these bombs, and that their stories must live in perpetuity for the edification of all of us to be in remembrance why nuclear weapons should never be deployed and really should never be created. So the potential for the total destruction of life brings to the forefront of our awareness that while political processes are essential in negotiating legal instruments of peace and security, the important role which religious communities play on this and all major global issues and challenges must be acknowledged. And this is why it's so, in and of itself, historic and important that the 4 largest interfaith organizations in the United States actually came together to participate in this jointly created statement, the Hiroshima Nagasaki Accord. So the religious communities play such a major role. Now, when you consider that 80% of the world's population are adherents to some faith tradition, and that religious faith communities speak the moral, ethical voices that articulate our common values and principles, that honors and respects life, nonviolence, and the ways of peace. There is no way that we can exclude the important voices and participation of the religious faith traditions and communities. So while President Gorbachev and Secretary of State George Shultz saw the promised land, it is the 80% of the world's believers who can actually help carry us there. And our ethical, moral values and principles that comprise the foundation from which all religions and sacred texts arise becomes the catalyst that will propel us there. But we must know that that catalyst is powered by love. And in my own life, I had the great privilege to have a very beloved spiritual mother who told me God is love. And if we believe that God is love, then we must know that in every loving thought, word, and action, we are bringing the actualization of the living reality of God in our daily lives. Collectively, together, we, as religious faith communities, articulating the important role which we play based upon these ethical principles and sacred sayings that come from our religious sacred traditions and texts, will help us to reach the promised land, because our collective love will take us there. And I feel myself to be so honored to be in the company of each and every one of you, because of your tireless work, to be the vehicles and vectors of the power of this love, day in and day out, year in and year out, to be that manifestation of the love in action in all of the work that you do. So thank you, everyone. My deepest appreciation to all of you. Thank you.
Big applause. If we could, Audrey, you would hear the gratitude of thousands that you speak for. We are indeed grateful that you walked us from August 6, 1945, into the promised land, through the complexity of the issues around strategic negotiations, through the heroism of our great Gorbachev, through the first meetings in Reykjavik, through the strategic arms reduction, and the major statement made in 1985, no nuclear war can ever be won and should never be waged. Your talk was extremely substantive and inspiring, and I would like to turn it over now to Monica, who will be the first respondent and can build on some of the major themes that Audrey gave. And if you would have any questions or would like to speak, you can raise your hand now and you'll be put at the top of the list and I'll be able to find you on chat. Or you can write in the chat box anything you would like to know, and we'll pick that up after Monica speaks. Thank you again, Audrey. Monica.
Thank you.
Audrey, you are a very hard act to follow. Not only is it so full of your wisdom and care, but I know that your modesty in what you are doing to promote this, to make it, is it needs to be reinforced, that it is Audrey's team that is working to make this video tirelessly and to bring it together, and it has some amazing additional speakers, and it also has an award, and we are very excited that our award is looking towards the youth, and that Kekashan is on this call for her work and what she has done for nuclear weapons, and how we are going to continue this after the 75th anniversary. I am very, very excited about this video, and it is something that I encourage everyone to see, and you will get an announcement about it.
Can you give us the name of it, Monica? The name of the video? It's
the Hiroshima Nagasaki Accord.
Thank you.
Do we give it as a special name for the video, Audrey?
We haven't really given it a name. We are just naming it's a commemorative anniversary, 75th anniversary, and introducing the Hiroshima Nagasaki Accord. But is there a formal title at this time? No. But will there be one down the road? You never can tell, since the video is still being created.
Great suggestion, Martha.
Back to you, Monica.
I am not only so excited about this video and the fact that we have been working on it as a group with the interfaith organizations in a big way, and to have a message and to have the presentations from the mayors of the two cities. And Kekashan will be speaking for the youth perspective and receiving the award, the first award ever from our group on behalf. I am just, and in remembrance. I also wanted to add a little thing that others might have known, but I didn't know until we got into this. And I knew that there was a difference between the bomb that was dropped in Hiroshima and the bomb that was dropped in Nagasaki. I knew that, that they're just two different bombs. And one was 40 times more powerful than the other, killed less people in Nagasaki, and Hiroshima was the first bomb that was dropped. But Nagasaki was not even hit directly. Nagasaki was also a Christian community in Japan. And for those of us who've been in the UN, we've probably seen that statue of St. Agnes and wondered, what does that really have to do with the bombing? And it was that this bomb in Nagasaki was dropped on a Christian school and church. And that statue actually came from the epicenter. So we have that piece of history that we've seen and looked at the back and seen how cement just rippled because of the heat. And we have to, as a community, make this an issue of our time. Climate change is absolutely on everyone's mind. And it is something that is slowly and yet recognizably knowing that it will destroy us. Nuclear weapons can destroy us now and into the future at a moment's notice. And it is imperative that we take this seriously. And so in order to elaborate a little bit on the video from the 6th that will be shown 4 times over that weekend, on Saturday night, we will show on the 8th actually, and the hour before at 7 will be a look at Nagasaki by itself with the ambassador that Audrey mentioned, Tom Graham, telling his story about the importance of looking at Nagasaki. Barbara Newsom is a part of our group, and her father was a physician at Nagasaki right after the war. And we are looking for a habakasha from Nagasaki, but also to bring in a youth perspective on engaging people and opening our eyes to lift that fog of atomic darkness so that we will absolutely recognize in the imperative in front of us to do something immediately to reduce this before it demolishes civilization. The doomsday clock was set up after the dropping of the bombs, and it was set up 3 minutes to midnight. It is now 90 seconds to midnight. It has never been so close. We need to take this to heart.